I hesitated to cover Filmento again as his Revenge of the Fallen and Age of Extinction videos are okay. Some errors, but not enough to meet my requirements for me to make it a full-fledged video. But this one passes with flying colors, so watch as I deconstruct Filmento's argument as I argue Filmento's ignorance is so dense you need to spell out the plot for him in bold letters. And even then, it's 50-50 for him. However, I will make sure to clarify whether the information was available to Filmento at the time, since it's disingenuous to critique Filmento's points with new info after his video's release.
Bumblebee is a very unusual movie, because it's one of those ultra rare movies where you kinda get to see things from the Hollywood studio perspective and understand their frustrations. For years and years, Paramount makes these loud, mindless action movies that make billions of dollars at the box office. And all the while, everyone whines and complains that these movies are bad and that they have to have more heart and be more about character and so on so on. And then, when the studio finally listens to the fans and makes a movie that is exclusively heart and character, nobody shows up to see it.
To articulate my point, I'm going to give context to the development of the movie Bumblebee. It starts with the development of Transformers: The Last Knight, being designed to kick off a movieverse to the scale of the MCU. Paramount established a writing group to develop concepts and the movieverse itself. A big timeline, if you will. The brainstorming led to the inclusion of the flashback of Autobots fighting Nazis in Transformers: The Last Knight, setting up future movies set during the time period. Bumblebee was another concept that ended up being the first spin-off movie they decided to produce as The Last Knight was being finished. Unfortunately, the poor box office threw a wrench into this developing movieverse. The Last Knight's failure scared the studio into altering Bumblebee into a soft reboot of the franchise, leading to the addition of the fan-favorite opening sequence of the movie. This is a clear case of a studio attempting to extend the life cycle of the franchise. There's a point in the life of a business in which it's closing in on the point of no return of failure, prompting quick action to prevent this and restart the life cycle. In this instance, the studio needs to reinvent the franchise toward a new direction to keep the franchise relevant, allowing for more installments and revenue. Filmento saying the studio cares about or complaining is wrong, as they were making Bumblebee regardless. It's The Last Knight's poor box office that prompted the actual change that we did end up seeing. Bumblebee is different to Michael Bay's movies, not only in its execution but also its budget, as the budget for Bumblebee goes from $135 million from the usual $200 million, with a Christmas week release rather than the summer, showing the studio purposely meant for Bumblebee to be differently in terms of the audience expectations, but also box office numbers. Filmento refers to Bumblebee's box office as a disappointment, despite the CEO of Paramount's parent company Viacom, Bob Bakish, describing Bumblebee as solidly profitable for the studio. By the way, this article was published 2.5 weeks from Bumblebee's release. Filmento has no excuse for not being aware of this, assuming he allocates time for research, of course.
At least not outside of China. And the golden question this brings up is, why is that? Why didn't people show up to see this movie? The fact that Bumblebee didn't succeed at the box office like Transformers usually do and barely even made its money back is the worst possible outcome for everybody. Because now, what is very likely to follow is the DC Warner Brothers effect of overreaction.
I'm not going to put this against Filmento too much. He shouldn't be scrutinized for arguments that haven't aged well, especially in this case. I'm referring to the recent news with the renewal of Hasbro and Paramount Pictures film agreements that they plan to release a new movie trilogy and an animated movie separate for the trilogy for 2024. That's 4 movies from the satisfaction of Bumblebee's performance and positive reception. Sorry, Filmento, your point aged like milk.
In this case, we have a great film, but because it didn't make money, the studio starts getting anxious and begins to see problems in places where there are none. Recently, for example, the main producer of Transformers was out saying that there's a key component missing in Bumblebee. Essentially, he was implying that the movie was too much character and too little action, saying that in the future they plan to bring back the action-heavy Michael Bay style of Bayhem. Bayhem meaning things going boom.
I gave you a pass with the last point, Filmento, but I'm not with this one, as Filmento omits this article to push his narrative. The full article reports the producer's reaction to criticism and how he wishes to incorporate it into future films. The producer specifies they want to keep the character-driven focus of Bumblebee as they add more action, or Bayhem, to the next installments. The producer feels confident to tell almost any story, as he wants to focus on exploring more of an emotional dynamic set with Bumblebee, with Transformers that can be more human as Bumblebee couldn't speak for his own movie. Overall, this article voices the producer's desire to make more character-driven installments as they splice in more action, focusing on exploring other Transformers characters. Filmento's concerns of the next installments reversing back to Bay's direction is not justified. It's always a concern, but this article calms those type of worries, not stoke the flames like how Filmento is doing through this point in his video.
First of all, as to there not being things going boom in Bumblebee, I don't think that's really a valid claim, because I'm pretty sure that there are things going boom in Bumblebee.
The article reports that the concern was that Bumblebee lacked the same amount of action previous installments had, and it never said there wasn't any action. Read the article in full next time, Filmento. This is your job.
However, I do agree with the producer's implication that there is a key component missing from this movie. There is one key problem that made this movie become a financial letdown.
CEO of Viacom Bob Bakish referred to Bumblebee as a financial success, while Filmento considers Bumblebee a financial letdown. I'm gonna go trust the CEO. As I've said, a movie doesn't have to make all the money to be successful.
But the thing is, this problem isn't what you might first think it to be. Not what the producers might think it to be, not what the average moviegoer might think it to be.
4 billion people on this planet, including high management like the producer of Bumblebee, who has access to all the financials, couldn't come up with the same observation as you did. Ego is a dangerous characteristic, Filmento, and I suggest you should be wary.
The problem of Bumblebee isn't that it's too much character and too little action. The problem of Bumblebee is that it's only character and no plot. As in, yeah, this film does not have a plot.
The A plot is Charlie Watson befriending Bumblebee as the relationship helps her move on from her father's death. The B plot is the Autobot scout Bumblebee being the first on Earth to defend it from Decepticons until the rest of the Autobots arrive. Does Filmento rewatch movies for the video, or is it just me?
And so, here's the game plan for today's video, fellas and fellarettes. Firstly, we'll see what this fact of Bumblebee not having a plot actually means. Secondly, we'll find out how that missing plot serves as the core reason behind this movie's box office failure.
The CEO of Paramount's parent company, Viacom, said Bumblebee is, and I quote, solidly profitable. You are wrong, Filmento.
And finally, maybe we can also stumble on some sort of a fix to this problem. The main purpose of all this being to prove to Paramount that the solution they're looking for isn't to bring back Bayhem. And hopefully they are listening, because to be honest, we cannot go back to this.
The article that I went over that is also featured in your video confirms that is what they're doing. Your suggestion is correct, but it's not the pat on the back you think it is. In fact, the producer figured this one out less than a month after Bumblebee's release.
Since I did make the argument that Bumblebee has no plot, I guess the first thing I need to do is actually prove that argument. And perhaps the best way to do that is to look at the movie Bumblebee is directly inspired by, Steven Spielberg's E.T.
As opposed to it being more like the Iron Giant, per se? Since both are about a human befriending a robot and are both killer robots, while E.T. is more of a scarily powerful linkly alien that can levitate objects.
If you bring up the basic premise of E.T., you might notice that this premise consists of two separate halves. A lonely boy finds a stranded alien, and together they must work to find the alien's way back home. The first half tells the overall concept and the starting point of the movie. That's the story. The second half explains what the movie is actually about, the main active goal that the characters are trying to achieve. That's the plot.
The definitions of story and plot are close to interchangeable. Filmento's 2 points are presented as one conjoined sentence, which makes it confusing. So instead, here's a solution. I'm going to instead refer to the plot and the focus of E.T. The plot is an alien hides with a family from the pursuing government till it can find a way to get back home. The focus is the relationship that forms between the child and the alien. Confusion remedied.
Compare this to the premise of Bumblebee. A lonely girl finds a stranded alien robot and then they hang out until bad guys eventually come for them. Are you starting to see where I'm getting at?
Filmento is ignoring Charlie's efforts to help and fix Bumblebee, from getting him to run again, to giving him a new radio that Bee uses to communicate with others as an alternative to speaking. She does what she can with the limited information available to her. Filmento needs to rewatch the movie before writing these scripts, since it's breaking the supporting points to the central argument of the video.
To be fair to Bumblebee, the character work it does is fantastic. You really care about the girl, you really care about the robot. But the issue is, this movie is so focused on the characters and their relationship that it completely forgets to add in goals for them. As in, the characters don't really do anything. They don't have objectives that they're actively moving towards. Not until the very end, when Charlie has to save Bumblebee and then together they have to stop the Decepticons from calling in backup.
Charlie's attempts to fix Bumblebee is limited due to other responsibilities. A job, hiding Bee from the family, and her not understanding the full context of Bee's situation, coupled with the fact she's still grieving from the death of her father. All of these things considered, I think she does all she can do in the situation without totally breaking suspense of disbelief. The movie is about Charlie fully recovering from the loss of her father as Bumblebee recovers from his wounds and loss of memory, both helping each other achieve it, leading to the climax where both are fully recovered as people and achieve amazing feats. Bumblebee returns to being an Autobot soldier while Charlie overcomes her fear of diving, showing the development of the characters finalized in the climax of the movie. Does Filmento even watch the movie once at all? And even then, does he pay attention?
You could argue that the main plot of the movie is for Charlie to hide Bumblebee from John Cena.
It's not. The A-plot is Charlie recovering from the loss of her father. I don't like the concept of a Transformers story not having Transformers as the focus, but that's the sad truth. As a fan, I'll have to wait till 2023 for a chance to finally see Transformers be the A-plot of a live-action movie. And even then, I have my doubts.
And while that technically is a goal, not really, because hiding isn't a cinematically active goal.
The definition of cinematic is broad and doesn't line up to the way Filmento is using the word. Also, movies that focus on hiding from a threat as the premise of its movie or show doesn't deserve to be cut down based on its concept alone. Don't be a film fanatic, Filmento.
It's the equivalent of a lazy kid telling his mom that he's being active because he's actively sitting in this chair eating nachos.
Technically, he is being active, but the question I believe Filmento is raising is whether it's entertaining or not. The answer to Filmento's question will come down to execution, but even with the best of attempts, some people will still find it boring due to personal tastes. Filmento should explain why he thinks Bumblebee is boring, but we don't get that in this video.
Besides, if Charlie's goal really was to hide Bumblebee, she probably wouldn't be driving him all around town committing crimes.
Bumblebee was not meant to destroy the bully's car. It was not the plan. Otherwise, she would have brought a wrench to show B to break the car instead of bringing the toilet paper and the eggs. She does these events because that's her present antagonist. She isn't given the information we know about the Decepticons at that point, so it's unreasonable to put those expectations on the character. When she is given that information, she then adjusts to the situation and is eager to help Bumblebee. Filmento's complaint about the morality of the character has no weight. She doesn't know, and when she does, she acts the way Filmento wants her to, even when B tells her to hide.
If you're still not convinced, here's one more thing. Perhaps the biggest giveaway that a movie doesn't have a proper plot is when it consists of events and scenes that happen only because the story needs them to happen in order to function. And in Bumblebee, there's a big bunch of scenes like this. For example,
what is going on here? Do you want to check it out?
Okay. We will be right back.
based on the dialogue you just heard, it's very clear that the characters ended up at the cliff randomly and have no actual reason to be there.
Mimo walked in on Charlie and Bumblebee at night, likely when everyone was asleep. To prevent more people finding out, they meet up the next day to talk as they drive B across the coastline. They go out driving because they'll be safe away from possible family members walking in to discover Bumblebee. I do admit it's a coincidence with the timing of the party, but her not being curious to check it out is unreasonable restrictions toward a character. It's not like it's a military convoy.
They aren't there because they're looking for something. They aren't there because they're after something. They are there only because the story needs them to be, so that we can set up Charlie's heroic dive for later and also set up the egging scene, which leads to them being spotted by the police.
I'm glad Filmento can see that events lead to other events. He's wrong about the beach scene being a problem, and it doesn't need a hypothetical rewrite. This scene is to re-establish that she is uncomfortable about diving, and that she won't do it for popularity. Charlie being able to dive is tied to her grief of her father, and her diving in the climax shows she has moved on from the grief and cements her love for Bumblebee.
Another example, the scene where Bumblebee is at home alone.
We got a hit, I think. Where's that location?
On a short glance, this is a pretty funny and cute scene, but looking closer, it doesn't really make sense. Bumblebee did lose his memory, but he's still a grown adult, correct? I mean, he's still a soldier. So why does he act like a dumb little baby and stick his finger in a socket? Does he have a reason for it? Is it because he's trying to contact someone? No, it's because the story needs him to, so that the Decepticons can locate him.
Does he know what losing your memory means? Because in this case, it's complete memory loss. When someone loses all their memories, they're reduced back to square one. In the case of a Transformer, it's still being able to transform and move, unlike a human needing to learn how to walk again. Every interpretation of Transformers has them be born in their adult body, since they're robots, instead of having them grow from baby to adult like humans, making Bumblebee's full range of motion and transforming, despite having a full memory wipe, not necessarily be a flaw.
If you want more examples, just watch the movie and keep your eyes open.
Ironic.
These scenes aren't hard to spot. But regardless, the villains in this movie have a clear active goal, but the main heroes don't. And if your main heroes don't have a goal, then you don't have a plot. And next up, let's see what happens when you don't have a plot.
Charlie dives once more to rescue Bumblebee. Bumblebee is fine and needs no rescuing.
With Filmento's level of ignorance, you could hide a hippo in his house without him noticing. The A-plot, to anyone who hasn't seen the movie, is about Charlie recovering from the death of her father, learning how to move on with her life. Moving on is exhibited through her willingness to dive, which she hasn't done since her father's death. Her diving after Bumblebee in the climax shows the result of her journey, along with her fixing up the car she was working on with her dad. Then the B part is about alien robots or something, which saddens me as a Transformers fan. At least I was able to recognize the existence of the plot, unlike a certain movie critic.
The main purpose of movie marketing is to let the audience know in an intriguing way what your movie is about. And if your movie doesn't have an overarching plot and therefore isn't really about anything until the very end, there is nothing to market.
That isn't the job of a studio making the film. It's the job of the marketing team. Two separate entities. Mr. Film Critic giving advice about film as a job.
In other words, a character-exclusive blockbuster like Bumblebee is pretty much impossible to market.
That doesn't sound like a winning mindset at all. Sounds more like a quitter, to be exact.
Look at Infinity War, which has one of the most effective movie marketing campaigns of all time. Even though this film is filled with multiple different characters and locations and whatnot, the marketing always kept the essence of the movie very clear. Evil Thanos is trying to get the Infinity Stones to erase half of the universe, and the Avengers have to go put a stop to it. That, above all else, is what this movie is about. And it sounds a lot more intriguing than, say, the Avengers casually hang out on Earth having a good time.
Filmento ignores one of the major appeals of the MCU, the interactions between different heroes and villains regardless of it being a casual sit-down or an action sequence. The concept of strictly talking sequences isn't bad, there's only bad execution of the concept. Filmento's ignorance is the reason why we suffer the J.J. Abrams problem of writing, where the plot is only ever about stopping the end of the world, with an arbitrary timer attached to it, a trend that makes a franchise stale rather quickly.
Until evil Thanos at some point comes to fight them. You might think of what I just said as a joke, but with Bumblebee, that was the only premise the marketing team had to market this movie, which will never work. And they must have realized it too, since they so hastily invented a goal specifically for the second trailer.
Bumblebee, there is only one way to end this war. You must protect Earth and its people.
Well, Filmento, that's mainly due to the fact that the first trailer is classified officially as a teaser trailer. Filmento, your brain runs on outdated hardware, or research isn't a part of your video making process. I hope it's the latter, cause that is more easily fixed.
If you've seen the movie, then you know that this line doesn't exist like so. Optimus doesn't say this. The goal of protecting the Earth isn't what this movie is about. And it's very obvious in the trailer as well, because in one shot we hear Optimus telling Bumblebee to protect humans, and in the next shot we see Bumblebee fighting humans.
The concept of humans attacking Bumblebee as a misunderstanding was a plot point in the first Michael Bay movie back in 2007. The concept of evil humans being a threat as Autobots are protecting Earth is also an aspect done in Transformers Age of Extinction and The Last Knight. Adding complexity to the plot by throwing in a human faction as villains isn't a flaw. Filmento is arguing it is, thus dumbing down the story and direction you can take Transformers in. Additionally, trailers being slightly inaccurate to the film is not the issue he presents it as. We aren't dealing with blatant non-existent content found in many video game trailers. And it's definitely not the MCU's alterations to scenes that Filmento shows in his own video. Hulk was never in the Wakanda fight in the film. Are you going to point out that move, Filmento? Or are you just going to complain about Bumblebee doing slight dialogue alterations?
Even more, protecting the Earth is such a generic and intangible plot that by itself it doesn't really mean anything.
Saving the world is a popular go-to plot, but saying that it doesn't mean anything or doesn't work for audiences is an incredible reach.
And if moviegoers don't have a clear, intriguing plot to hook them, then they have no reason to show up. Same with word of mouth. Even though Bumblebee got positive responses from pretty much everybody, there was never a big rush at the theaters to see it, like there was with Black Panther for example.
I worked at my local movie theater at the time and found plenty of people coming to see the movie despite heavy competition that year. I deem Filmento wrong through this personal experience. Now, the aspect of Black Panther that Filmento fails to mention is the strong media campaign to make it a moral issue to go see the movie. Otherwise, you're racist. Look at any negative review of the movie and you'll find those comments and assumptions. Personally, I've been told by other movie theater employees that worked during Black Panther being in theaters that a customer claimed they were racist for moving Black Panther into a smaller theater, despite the turnout being lower after months after the movie's release. I deem Filmento wrong again through the personal recounting of my co-workers' experience.
And again, I'd argue it's because at the end of the day, the movie isn't really about anything. If you wanted to recommend it to a friend, the only thing you could say was that, yeah, it's this great feel-good movie about this friendship between this girl and this robot, and yeah, that's about it.
Plot A is Charlie recovering from the loss of her father. Plot B is Bumblebee recovering his memory and strength to defend Earth. We deserve better YouTuber film critics.
And like it or not, that's a characteristic of a low-budget indie film, not a must-see Hollywood blockbuster.
Stop being bigoted toward indie films. They're just as entertaining and worthwhile as blockbuster films. Statements like these are ruining the public's taste in movies. Stop with your normie takes, Filmento.
In his interview, the Transformers producer mentioned that a common criticism he heard from viewers was that Bumblebee didn't have enough Bayhem and action. And even though this criticism might have truth in it, once again, I believe that the real reason behind this criticism is the lack of an active plot. Even though I really enjoyed the characters of the movie, I was still constantly checking my watch in the theater because it had been over an hour without any clue as to where the movie was going, which made it feel very stagnant.
We had a decade of Michael Bay's Transformers movies, forming the public view of what Transformers is to them, full of explosions and action. It is normal to feel bored from the shift away from the action toward characters, and it's nothing to be worried about. This is a natural part of the transition, and Filmento referring to it as a problem, specifically as a non-active plot, is an example of Filmento's misinterpreting the issue, which is a subjective adjustment issue, rather than specifically an aspect of the film itself.
And if a movie feels stagnant and like it's not going anywhere, in many viewers that can create the illusion that there must be too little action, when in fact there is action and Bayhem sprinkled across the whole movie. I'm not going to act naive and say that big movies don't equal big audiences. If you make a massive cinematic experience and set it all around the world, of course it has more potential for a massive audience.
It also has equal amount potential to screw up, which leads into the failure of The Last Night and why we gave up on the appropriately titled Bayverse.
But to say that Bumblebee didn't make money because it didn't have a loud product placement infested explosion montage every 5 minutes, I don't think that's true. The real reason, I think, is because this movie doesn't have a clear active plot and therefore isn't about anything.
Plot A, grieving human. Plot B, alien protects Earth.
And therefore has nothing to hook the audience with.
It's way.
Is there anyone that can help you? Do you have a family? Oh, who but me?
Charlie has a goal of helping Bumblebee.
No, me. Oh, who but me? Who am I?
Never mind, that shit ain't real.
Filmento states that the context for a trailer wasn't right, so that makes the movie bad. Unless you're the MCU with your blatant alterations to actual scenes.
Now that we've identified the missing plot as the main problem with Bumblebee, let's see in what way this problem could have been rectified. It's a pretty tough spot because the overall story of this movie revolves around Autobots establishing Earth as their new base. But because the heart of this movie is a small, intimate story about the friendship between a girl and a robot, you can't make the actual plot directly link with that.
This is me saying to you, the viewer, that if you think you can do it, go for it. If Filmento can remain successful after so many bad takes, then anything is possible.
You can't just give this little girl a huge goal of fighting off armies of enemies and single-handedly saving the world and whatnot.
I agree, Filmento, and it's the reason why I hate Marky Mark's character so much.
That isn't intimate, and therefore we cannot use that. But luckily, we don't need to. All we need to do is give her a small goal with the illusion that it links with everything else. The reason I say this is because just recently I played through the PlayStation game God of War. For those of you who don't know, God of War is an epic tale about this God of War fighting against huge monsters and other gods. But those of you who do know, you already know that isn't what this game is actually about. Because at heart, this game is a very intimate story about a father and his boy. And accordingly, the main objective of the game is also very intimate. You need to take the ashes of your dead wife to the tallest mountaintop. That goal doesn't have anything to do with fighting monsters or gods, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you know what all of it is about. Why am I battling the shirtless Norse god of light? Why am I willingly rowing inside the belly of a giant snake? Oh yeah, I have to get my wife's ashes to the mountaintop. The goal isn't directly linked with anything else going on, but it works, because there is an illusion that it is.
I'm getting the impression that Filmento needs to be directly told the goals of the story, otherwise he doesn't understand it. Therefore, he deems one bad and the other good. And there's no illusion when it's literally the goal achieved by the end. It would be an illusion if you tell the audience, say, failure is the greatest teacher, but then have the main protagonist be a living example against that message.
Using this lesson taught by God of War, here's what the main driving goal of Bumblebee could, for example, be.
Oh no, here comes the I can write a better story pitch. This usually does more harm than good for the critic.
I'm not saying this is the only right choice, I'm just giving an example. Since Bumblebee lost his voice box in the beginning, the goal of Charlie, very much like was the case in E.T., is now to help him find that voice box/transmitter and repair him, so that they can contact his home and find out who he is. This objective fits Bumblebee because he has to know his past, and it also fits Charlie because she's a skilled mechanic who never got to say goodbye to his now dead father, and therefore now has nobody to talk to. Maybe the voice box is just lost, maybe it's held by John Cena, doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if the voice box ultimately even works, as long as we always actively move towards it.
Charlie is already doing that by installing a new radio into Bumblebee so he can eventually communicate through it. This is another example of evidence proving Filmento doesn't watch the movie.
Even if you don't like the actual goal that I'm proposing, you can't deny the fact that it pretty much automatically fixes a lot of the stuff we've talked about. For example, all those random scenes where things happen just because the story needs them to happen. Now, Charlie and Bumblebee don't go to the cliff just randomly. They go there because there maybe is someone there with information about the voice box.
Yes, because everyone knows Californian-raised high school students who prefer to be out at the beach would definitely know about a voice box designed for an alien robot. That doesn't raise thousands of questions at all from how unrealistic that is, exempting the whole alien robots thing.
Now, Bumblebee doesn't stick his finger in the socket just because. He does it because he maybe excitedly wants to test out his newly found voice box.
He's suggesting you test out your new voice by sticking your finger into an electrical socket, rather than, trying to speak.
And so on. But most importantly, you now have a clear plot to hook the audiences with. This plot isn't necessarily always linked with John Cena and the Autobot war and the two Decepticons, but again, it doesn't matter. All that does matter is the illusion of a direct link.
Here we go again with Filmento recommending shady marketing tactics to trick audiences to see your movie. Filmento suggested this in my last video covering him, but I'll say it here again. Audiences aren't stupid. They recognize these tactics, and success through this shady method is dwindling in its return. The Michael Bay Transformers are over, and it's because of a reliance on shady tactics. Filmento is outright wrong with this outdated sleazy method of filmmaking.
What matters is that the audience always knows what all of this is about and where things are headed.
Big brain Filmento needs to be directly told what is going on, otherwise he can't understand it. After 6 years, I would expect a film critic to evolve past this level of thinking.
For example, compare these two premises. A lonely girl finds a stranded alien robot, and then the two casually hang out until evil government agents and Decepticons come for them. Or, a lonely girl finds a stranded alien robot, and together they must then fight their way past evil government agents and Decepticons in order to find the robot's lost voice box transmitter and uncover his secret past.
The government agents of Sector 7 aren't evil. They're acting within the information they're given, which is close to nothing since the Decepticons are lying to the humans. Bumblebee recovering and reinstalling his lost voice box will only give Bumblebee his voice back, but it won't solve his memory loss problem that was established toward the beginning of the film.
I can't speak for you, but I do know which movie I would go see, and all it took was a tiny bit of plot.
This sounds more like removing the entire engine of a car and replacing it with an engine that's more generic. But let's not be too mean to Filmento. You would think Filmento would get better at analyzing films and shows over the hundreds of videos made over the course of multiple years. But that's not the case. Filmento claims Bumblebee doesn't have a plot, which it does, and doesn't do his due diligence to research before stating claims like Bumblebee being a financial disappointment when the CEO of the parent company says otherwise. Worse is his inaccurate recounting of events of the film and criticizing the film for what the trailers do. How do you punish the movie over that but mention movies that do it far worse and give no criticism toward them for it? Filmento is bad at his job, which isn't making edited videos, because he does that well. His job is being a film critic, and with so many mistakes present, I find it hard to consider any of Filmento's opinions on film. Sadly, years of practice for Filmento doesn't translate to perfection for his craft.